Okay. All right. Looks like we're ready to start, everybody. Welcome so much for coming. I'm really grateful for everybody to be here. My name's Janelle Cass. I am an Air Force veteran and a local business owner, a very concerned citizen here in Edmonds, and a candidate for Edmonds City Council position number 2. Thank you. I thought it'd be really important for us to come together today to talk about this topic. As I'm doorbelling everywhere, it's top priority with everyone, but it's also something that's near and dear to my heart. Like you and many of our Edmonds neighbors, we are becoming quite aware of our city, that our city is not insulated from the growing number of people suffering with drug addiction, living on the streets. We've all driven to Seattle, noticing how tents and trash are creeping up along I-5. I should add, we might have noticed a few people here in Edmonds as well. We may have a family member or a friend suffering with addiction or mental health condition that's causing them to live in one of these tents. I want to share with you that I have an uncle with mental illness and who has had history of addiction, who he himself has been without a house and without good quality care. And I've also had 2 cousins who were ravaged by addiction. And of those 2 girls, they were prostituted to make sure that they could afford their habit. It took going to prison to actually clean them up and give them a new life and to give them dignity. And I'm really happy to say that one of those cousins just graduated from University of Hawaii on the dean's list. And yeah. So very, very proud of her, very thrilled that she was able to make that recovery and to go above and beyond. And I know that while she was in prison, being part of Christian ministries really helped her. And so we'll probably touch on that later today too. I know when we see the tents and we think of people, and we see the trash, it evokes a strong reaction of maybe like the emotions that we're feeling is fear, anger, maybe disgust, definitely a lot of heartache and confusion. And today I'm hoping that we'll learn about some programs that are making progress and finding ways to balance accountability and compassion. And to talk about what's going on in Edmonds and what are some things that we can do to make sure that we learn from mistakes in other communities and that we're going to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars in helping people who are struggling with drug addiction and homelessness. So we've been blessed with some amazing panelists here today, and I can't wait to introduce them. We have Mike Kersey, who is the president of Courage to Change. He is farthest to my right. We've got Ken Thomas, who is an officer from Arlington, and we've got Shane Daugherty, who is Associate Director of New Heart Foundation, and we're very blessed to have Ellen Hardwick, who is one of our finest EPDs, retired now. And I'm going to go in a little bit more about their bios as I introduce each one. So let me start with Mike, who I had the pleasure of meeting just a couple weeks ago on a needle cleanup project in South Everett. And that project was pretty amazing. I think within just 2 days, there was over tens of thousands of needles picked up, would you say, Mike? And there were volunteers from the USS Chosen, Navy sailors. It was a really amazing group. As well as people who are in recovery, who had been living on the streets, who are coming back to help clean up, and it was really inspiring. So, the mission of Courage to Change Recovery Services is to help those still suffering from addiction and hopelessness transition into a life of wellness and recovery. Their vision is to empower and transform lives into recovery from a place of addiction. Their action plan is in facilitating and navigating recovery services with each client to ensure their success. And I know Mike can tell you a lot about his history and how many miles he puts on his car helping each and every client. So if you could, Mike, take it away.
Thank you. My name's Mike. I'm with Courage to Change. and that's my secretary, and a vice president here, along with Jason Cockburn in the back there. Raise your hand, Jason. Jason does outreach alongside of us, and he calls and we get people into detox and treatment. So I started doing this about 18 years ago and started with a recovery house in Mukilteo. And I would first start taking people in that were in long-term recovery that had fallen into, some type of, financial or maybe a divorce or something happened. And so I'd take them in, and of course they, would pay rent or whatever it might be to help. And so here about 4 years ago, I had to sell that house because the taxes just were wiping me out. So we started Courage to Change, and I was with the Hoff Foundation on their board of directors for a while. I don't know if anybody's familiar with them, but they run female housing and help to do the same thing, provide meals and whatnot for homeless. And then with the Hand Up Project, I was on their board of directors for a while, and treasurer there. And then we started Courage to Change Housing, which we had like 32 clients that we took care of in housing and helped them along their path, and had great success rates there. And then we started Courage to Change Recovery Services, and that's what I do today. And it's basically, I was doing it before, but now it's more official, I guess. But when I get a phone call, I go pick them up wherever they might be, on the side of the road or the woods. I get the Diversion Center, treatment centers, other foundations and nonprofits that call, and I'll go pick those people up and take them, and I have enough resources that I'm able to get them right into detox almost immediately. So because anybody that works with addiction knows that they have a moment of clarity, and when they have that moment of clarity, it's not tomorrow at 2:30 in the afternoon, it's today, right now. And so I try and do that as much as possible. I talk to them. I know where I need to take them. I work with 4 different detox centers, hospitals, and Smoky Point Behavioral and other organizations. So just over experience, I've learned after talking to these people for a while, I can tell if they're in some kind of psychosis, what kind of services they might need, if they're really ready to go to detox and treatment. And if they do and go through those processes in that order, detox, treatment, then we'll help them, provide them with housing, and however long that might take, or help them get funding. And it's, I make it sound kind of easy, but it's not. It takes a long time sometimes in a process, so we try and house them so I don't have to put them back on the street right out of detox. Because when they make that commitment and they want to get help, like I said, it's not tomorrow. And so by being able to provide those services in a seamless manner, it lets them know that we care about them. And, a lot of places consider them secondhand citizens and whatnot. But, we try and, love them where they're at until they can love themselves. So with that, I guess I should talk about, what you guys are talking about doing here in the city of giving out vouchers for hotels. In my experience, what I've found is that it's great to give people housing, okay? Because it's kind of a human needs, and we're coming up on winter and people are gonna need that so they're not out freezing to death. But there has to be accountability. Without accountability, then you're just housing an addict, and it's going to turn into a trap house, or they're going to start using in the hotel rooms, do a lot of damage, and then, who's going to be responsible for that? The taxpayers. So I've actually signed contracts with cities to help them navigate and get people, when they want to get housing, that they have a process that they have to go through to get that housing and maintain it. And by that, help them get into detox if they're using, and treatment. And then when they successfully complete those programs, help them move on to the next step, housing and becoming productive members of society, right? And it doesn't always work that easy. because sometimes we have to house them for a short period of time, but there has to be accountability within that hotel, because they will do damage, they will bring their friends in, they will use in the hotel rooms, and then, who's going to be responsible for that? I've got lots of examples I can talk to you about afterwards if you like, but what I found is, in my experience, it just needs to, be really put together well with process and procedures, with people like on this board that know what to do and how to do it and how to deal with it. And Jason, we've all worked within the hotel systems. Alyssa helped write some of the process and procedures last October for the hotel that worked that had a 64% success rate, right? And that was because there was process and procedures to help those people. And I was at that hotel every day, taking people to detox and getting them into treatment. So the way that worked, the way I saw it was, we would house them, but we give them a certain, date that they had to be working on themselves, getting into detox and treatment if they are active in an active addiction, and somebody has to be there to maintain that and watch them. You have to have security. You can't just throw them in a hotel room and expect everything to work out and they're going to call you when they're ready, right? It doesn't work that way. So anyway, we'd be more than happy to talk to anybody about that if they'd like to after here, because I could probably talk all day. But so I've been in recovery myself since October 8th of 1999. So I've been doing this for a while in recovery, and not till I got solid in myself and what I wanted to do did I move on to helping others. And so in this process, I've learned a lot about it. I know how the addicts work because I was one myself, and I'm not saying I'm any kind of guru by any extension of the imagination, but I just have learned over the years what it takes. And I'm grateful that I can do that today and help these people, because sometimes takes one addict helping another, letting them know there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that once they fall in that hole, that there's somebody there to help them out, and that's really kind of where I stand. And afterwards, I guess we can talk more about it. Like I said, I could sit here all night and talk about it, but I'll shut up now. How about that? Thanks, everybody.
So next, and we'll have a chance to do questions after all of this and have a nice open forum, okay? Next, I'm really happy to introduce Ken Thomas, who is an Arlington officer and a member of the community outreach team that they have. And it's made up of officers from Arlington and Marysville and Snohomish County deputies. Hopefully I'm getting this right, because I took this off of a press release. Excuse me. Snohomish County social workers that work with homeless individuals to get the help they need and to get them off the streets back on their feet. They focus on communities' homelessness and addicted adults, getting them connected with services, including rehab, drug addiction treatment, housing, transportation, and more. And the key here is that they do work with an embedded social worker, right?
Yes.
And we've heard about great success between Arlington and Marysville, so that's why we're really lucky to hear from Ken today. So I'm going to let you take it away and talk about your program.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me? We good? Thank you for having me. I'm Ken Thomas, City of Arlington Police Department. Just rough background, 25 years in law enforcement with Arlington. I watched that city grow, just like those that live in their communities. It was half the size, half the population. Now we've doubled that. Change happens, and it can happen without you realizing it, and then you're into situations that you need to manage suddenly, such as homelessness and drug addiction. And I think we've done a good job now paying attention to some things we can do to help our community deal with that problem. And hopefully it really appears that our partnership with the county and the sheriff's office has been a huge benefit, and teaming up with Marysville as well, because we're more able to not have kind of essential city boundaries issues. We're overlapping constantly and helping each other as a team. Essentially, if you look at homelessness, homeless folks are always on the move. They're not just in one place all the time. So they go to where the resources are, or where they can kind of be left alone. And so sometimes it overlaps, and that we found over time, especially working with Marysville, is that we were moving people back and forth. But when we were kind of doing more enforcement-focused work before this program came together, I don't think it was very effective, and we realized that. And then kudos to my chief, who came up with this plan to work with the sheriff's office, because they already had this in place in 2018. They started building this program with just one sergeant and a social worker. And they went out and they've learned, so we've picked up where they've learned from, so this is another benefit. They were going out and meeting folks in the woods, on the streets, trying to get them to come into treatment and get into the program. Then they would find out that they're not as easily motivated, or they're hard to get, they can't make it to an appointment. They don't have phones, they don't have a time system, there's no time management. So then it turned into reaching out, actually meeting them at their camps, bringing them to the appointments, and continuing that contact. So it was a lot of hands-on work. And then they just keep building from that at that point. When we came into the program, they didn't have something, I don't know if anybody's heard of this, it's the Diversion Center. Is anybody aware of that? Fantastic. This part of that, the last sheriff had space in the work release center at the jail, and they have basically turned that into, I'm not using the right terms, basically an emergency recovery center while we work with them to get into treatment. So it allows us on the street, so when I'm out there with my social worker and we make contact and they're ready to go, just like he said, they want to go now. Right now we can literally take them from the street to the center, and there's professionals that work there, also people that have been through the experience to help them as well, so that's nice. And they have great management there that allows us to put people into this center and schedule the assessments they need and medical care they need before they go to treatment, so all these basic needs are met. And they're off the street, so they're in a safe, secure place, and it's voluntary. I'm probably going to be jumping around in my thoughts, so I apologize. So all of this together has made it a great benefit to work with this team in this program. Essentially, my job is working with this team is we literally go out and we're looking for homeless folks. We're responding to citizens calling about someone that they see is in need with, and it could even be a mental health crisis at the time. And a lot of the mental health crises turn into our homeless contacts and turn into treatment or getting into Smoky Point Behavioral or Providence, and then working with them from there. And we've networked with all those social workers within those systems. So we're in good communication with those folks to kind of manage the people that we work with as well. So some overlap that we do that is also a benefit. I have learned a lot as a police officer with this program. I knew nothing about, we knew we struggled with the services that were needed to kind of mitigate the problems that we were seeing, but as an officer, we're just out doing our job, working with what we have. Hearing people say, I would be in the middle of a parking lot at 2 in the morning listening to somebody say, yeah, I'm waiting to get into treatment. I honestly didn't know what that meant. They were waiting for someone to get them set up, like yourself, into treatment, but there was no place for them to be while they were waiting. Now we have some systems in place where we can get them somewhere safe, and because when they're ready, they are ready. It's time to go, let's do this. And I've seen people change their minds in 5 minutes and not want to do it, but we've made a contact, and that's the other thing that we get to do is make positive contacts with people. The area I work in is pretty much North Snohomish County, so say Everett North is our area, mostly my city, but again, we overlap. And so a lot of the folks that I've initially been working with knew me as a patrol officer, as a contact with a little conflict once in a while. Now, and I think that was also a benefit when I started this program because they already knew me and could trust me. And when we show up with a social worker next to us, initially they're confused, and then they understand that we're out there trying to help them get to a better place. And the social work is a very fantastic thing to have, because all I need to do is introduce them and step back, and they can have their conversation, and they're feeling safe, and we can keep going forward. Sometimes that takes time. Sometimes it takes several contacts. Like I said, when they're ready, they're ready. When they're not, they're not. We've had many, many successes. I could go on, but it's probably the top 3 this last 2 months is we have been able to even contact people and get them, not just, I guess you'd call it mental health as well, but we were able to get people that have come clear from, say, the East Coast and have been lost over here. All it takes is a bus ticket to get them back to the services they're already connected to and family. So huge benefit with that. That gentleman called me a few weeks ago and thanked us, and it was in a good spot. Another young lady who we intervened with, it was a domestic violence call. She ended up from way across the country as well. We were able to remove her from that situation and get her back to her family. Not always necessarily directly drug and alcohol related, but tied with that, and then the homeless issue. So she was back with her friends and family and services that she needed from the mental health side. And of course, we're always working with the folks in our community. I'm going to keep going probably. So, is there time? Okay, I keep on and on. So, I try to break down our program, and it's a little, usually I have a PowerPoint behind me and I can go through it. Essentially, I'm a part of a co-response team that goes out and meets with people directly in the field. We work with other services constantly, which is a benefit. I'm also part of the North Snohomish County Outreach, which is another nonprofit working with the homeless. I'm on that board as well, so I get to see it from both angles and how hard it is to fund these programs, who really need the help as well financially, because they're another key component, right? So funding is huge and something to think about when you do these programs, because it has to be continual. You start running out of money, it becomes an obstacle. I know when COVID hit, we had a huge influx of funds, which was quite helpful, because the diversion center that we had was also limiting population. So we were able to counter that with putting people in hotels and managing it. And like you said, managing it was very important. That all worked out well. And we just keep going. But I think the benefit to any community is having some kind of focus, and can you continue to look at these programs to see how you can improve them. And my program is even tapped into being able to go out and help the businesses and the private properties that are dealing with the homelessness as well. So a lot of contacts and information is shared, and improvements in properties, and reducing squatting issues and things like that also come into play when I'm working out there. I'm going to pause. Sorry.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ken. So our next panelist is Shane Daugherty. He is the Associate Director of New Heart Foundation. Shane is the New Heart Foundation consults, trains, and provides resources to local church leaders for international ministry for those suffering from addictions and life-controlling issues. In addictions, he coaches students at New Heart Place, a 12 to 18 month discipleship home for those coming out of a lifestyle of addiction, of which he is a graduate, actually. Finally, he's a men's issue group leader for New Heart Ministries. He passionately believes that being clean and sober is not just the point, but instead merely a byproduct of an authentic relationship with Jesus Christ. And what I want to say is, in talking with Shane, is learning about, you hear about some people that detox is kind of this short period of time. Then you've got rehab, which is another short period of time. What happens when you're looking at your entire life, and what are some means and what are some successful ways to make sure that it's ongoing? And after seeing my cousin go through rehab many, many times, seeing what finally stuck, I think you can speak to that. So
yeah, thank you.
Take it away, Shane.
Thank you for inviting me. So it probably would be beneficial for me to kind of just talk about where I come from and kind of how I got to where I'm at, because in that conversation, you'll kind of understand some of the mindset that I've uncovered and that some of us have uncovered in this ministry. So I come from 30 years of addiction, active addiction, meth, coke, you name it. That was my story for many, many years. Like many of us, we've gone through some traumatic experiences in life that, I learned what the world taught me, how to cope with those traumatic experiences, how to protect myself, so coping mechanisms, protective mechanisms along the way. I didn't have some of the mentors or some of the people around me to be able to help me navigate through some of those things in the beginning, and I learned from peers. Hey, you know what? Take this drug, drink this drink, and all of a sudden now I was good for a minute, until it became a problem. At a point, it became a very, very difficult problem for me. I went through 6 different treatment centers. So 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, you name it, I've done it all, right? And what I learned is that I learned about what it means to be clean and sober. And it was a behavior. I can go and I can be clean and sober and get a job, and I can pay my taxes, and I can do those kinds of things and do what society tells me to do. But, the problem was, it wasn't just stopping using drugs and alcohol. Drugs and alcohol, once I stopped that, I was still stuck with the core issues I had been dealing with all my life. So I had to learn a new way to look at things. And that came through discipleship. So what happened was, the story is that after this 6th treatment center, and I went back out and started using meth again, my uncle had come and knocked at my door, and I'd been up for a week on the stuff, right? And came, knocked at my door and said, Shane, I want you to come to work with me. He was a landscaper, he still is, but he was a landscaper, and I worked with him in my younger formative years. By the way, he was the guy that told me that if you keep doing what you're doing, you're gonna end up like this. And I'm like, yeah, sure, and sure enough, it happened. I mean, if I knew then what I know now, right? But he came knocking at my door and said, Shane, I know what you're doing. I know what you're up to. I just want you to come to work with me. You don't even have to work. Just come sit in the truck with me. I want to talk to you. I'll pay you to sit in the truck with me. And I said, okay. I mean, I could use the money. I'd spent all my money on drugs at that time anyway. And, maybe, who knows? So I'd gone the next day, try to clean myself up as best I could, went and sat in the truck while he talked to me, and he was speaking life into me and telling me how much God loves me and how much, doesn't want me to die, and that God has a plan for my life. And I'm like, I know what treatment is. I've done that before, and I can put in a year or 2 of sobriety, as I'm hanging on, white knuckling through it, right? But that's not the point. And so as I continue to, I said, you know what? Okay, I'll try that. And as I'm sitting in the truck, my aunt comes walking up behind me with a plate of food, and just blessed me with a plate of food. And it was just, they were just loving on me, right? And it's kind of like what this brother's talking about doing down here, is coming with food and these kinds of things and loving on them, loving on you. And so they were loving on me. So I said, okay, fine, I'll meet with Pastor Ron. This was over at Westgate Chapel, and we'll talk. He said, I want to introduce you to what's called New Heart Place. Now, New Heart Place was a new ministry out of Westgate Chapel at that time. It's a 12 to 18 month discipleship home for students through that discipleship process for men. And by the way, they're just now got one ready for women right now too, so we're excited about that for women as well. But I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. I went and I had the interview, and they said, okay, we'll accept you, but in order for you to come, you need to make sure you're on detox, which is where that detox process comes into place, and you also need to show your commitment. So I had to show up to a ministry called New Heart Monday Night, which was called New Heart Ministry. And so I had to show up there on a consistent basis just to prove that I was actually want to do this. I had to put some some accountability behind what I was doing, right? So I showed up, and so I was invited, and I went into this 12 to 18 month treatment. It wasn't a treatment; it's a discipleship home. Treatment is something different. This is actually changing the way I think. I learned about who I was, who others were with me in relation to me, and who God is, and who God says I am. And so in this process, I learned some stuff. I learned about how to take care of myself, with my diet. I learned how to respond. Being in this 12-month kind of environment, I went through some stuff. I went through some anger. I went through depression. I went through relational issues with other guys in a closed, kind of protected environment. And I learned how to respond to that, which if I was out after a 30-day treatment, going out and going through recovery, and I might have had a sponsor, it might have been AA 12 steps to clean and sober, whatever the case might be. All that's great. It's all good. Don't get me wrong. But I had done that before. I needed something different. And what I found after this, or during this process, is, like I said, clean and sober is just a byproduct of my relationship with Jesus. It's not the point. And so as I continue to do that, now, some of these fences that I needed to build along the way that I learned was to be in relationship. So part of my addiction involved isolation. I wanted to go somewhere and isolate. So I had to get involved with ministry. I had to get involved with helping others. And I noticed that Mike, if I could, Mike, you were speaking about, these folks that are coming out of this, they had to go back in or go back out and help pick up the stuff that other people were doing. They were getting involved in giving back of their time. And that's what it was. I had to give back what I was receiving. And so I became a leader in these other environments. I built these fences around that protected me from going down that slippery slope. I learned some stuff. I mean, psychology, really, it just illuminates the scriptures for me at this point. It's pretty awesome. So as I go through this process, I'm going to church on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and these same core group of people that I'm seeing day in and day out when I'm going to church are saying, Shane, I love you. You're doing great. Hang in there. Come back. Keep coming back. You're doing great. We love you. You're doing great. And eventually, God's love broke through. And not only could I start to receive love, but I could give love back. And that was so important. So I got plugged into this Men of Valor group at church, and where I'm praying for pastor and for the other people of the congregation. I'm getting involved in that process. I got involved with leadership in that New Heart ministry. And that New Heart Monday night ministry, what this includes, which is so awesome, is it's like a triage center. What it is, it's a side door into the church. In my own experience, I was in a dark cave for 30 years. Darkness. I got used to that darkness. I had to step out of that darkness, and where I needed to be was in the sanctuary of that church, the full-on light of that sanctuary with the body of Christ. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't get from where I was to where I needed to be. I was an enemy of God in my own mind. And the truth is that when I went into that kind of environment, I saw people looking down at me because I didn't smell like them, I didn't look like them, I didn't talk like them. I felt like I shouldn't be there. But that's where I needed to be. So what this New Heart ministry did through Monday night is it created a side door experience into that very church that I needed to be in. And in this side door church, it's not a separate church, in this side door experience, leaders from that church came and facilitated this group. And it was like a triage center. I think of a hospital. I think of a local community hospital where somebody gets into a motorcycle accident and they're bleeding from the leg. I guarantee you the triage nurse is not condemning that person for riding a motorcycle or how they got there. What they care about is binding up the wounds, right? Binding up the wounds and getting to the doctor, they can get them fixed. That's what New Heart Ministry on Monday nights at Westgate Chapel right now is doing, and what we're doing at other churches around the community. But so with this community, so in this process, people are loving on them, saying, welcome, we don't care how you got here, no condemnation, no guilt, we're glad you're here. And then what we do is we have some word, we have some fellowship and some food to be able to handle their physical needs and some of those emotional needs. And then there's worship and a word. And then from there we break off into the individual groups, men's issues, women's issues, chemical dependency, families of the addicted. And this is where we're speaking specific language to those of us in those groups so we can understand what's going on with that. But the whole point of that is for relationship. The whole point of that is for transparency, because we get to express the conditions of our heart as the Word of God shows it. And once it's lifted up, then His healing power comes in and takes His, holy squeegee, if you will, and wipes it off the top and surface of our heart, so that all that's remaining is that refined gold. So what we're finding now in this process of this ministry of Monday night ministry is that these same folks that wouldn't be caught dead in the sanctuary of the local church, this ministry becomes a bridge. And now these same folks are showing up on Sundays and Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there's healing. I've seen grown men. I actually facilitate the men's issues group of the Monday night meetings as well. And I'm seeing grown men crying, talking about father wounds, talking about experiences that they had back in the day. These kinds of things that are so, so important for that transformation. Now, moving forward, my role. Well, as you can see, I wasn't probably good for anything 30 years ago, right? But now currently I am, as of January, I'm now the Associate Director of New Heart Foundation, which is a separate private entity. It's a 501c3, so private, or not private, but public charity. And so what we do in this particular New Heart ministry, or New Heart Foundation, is I go out and I reach out to local church leaders and leaders within the community in the state of Washington, and I resource them for their intentional ministry to the broken and hurting, those suffering from life-controlling issues and addictions. And I help train them up. I coach them up. I give them materials that they need to be able to hold their own New Heart ministry, and let those churches not be just a place where people gather to talk about the golf scores from last week, but rather get to talk about and be part of that community hospital to their local community. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity to share a little bit about my testimony and about what God has done for me. But all of these things are true that I'm seeing down the road, and I'm going to be speaking to each and every one of you guys down here, because I think that there's some impact that can be brought at the level that I work with these folks as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Shane. It definitely, we need to involve all of our church communities here in Edmonds to make sure that we, propagate success. I have to stop and say it's really interesting that we could have a panel with 2 past addicts and 2 police officers here. Anybody else? I think that's pretty awesome. Okay, our last panelist is Edmonds' very own Alan Hardwick. As you guys may or may not know, hopefully you do, that he was one of our acting assistant chiefs before he just retired not too long ago, about 4 or 5, you're counting months?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. He's a published author and musician, in addition to the fact that he has a history of working in law enforcement and intelligence communities. He's a leadership instructor at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Center with exceptional skills in interview and interrogation. So maybe he'll be asking the questions. He also has a background in counterterrorism, homeland security. He is going to talk to us a little bit, I'm hoping, about what he's seen here in Edmonds, where he thinks maybe our gaps are, and how we're doing, or maybe a little bit of what you've seen of how we're handling people maybe committing crimes that are associated with drug addiction, and what our level of drug addiction homelessness might be.
It's a good question. What is our level of homelessness and drug addiction in the city? I think it's similar to most places. If you take a swath of everyone in the room right here and apply the county averages for number of people who are homeless or drug addicted, this room is probably not going to reflect that. Okay? So how we count these things matters. And, stats are what you want them to say, people will say. And so we can always debate ad nauseum for, what the real issue is in terms of the population that are homeless or drug addicted. The reality is it exists. So whatever the number is, the impact that we see comes in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's, as been referenced before, people see tents on the side of the road, or they see somebody standing in traffic or standing on top of a car in traffic, worried about the sharks around them. That was the story. So there's things like that that happen, and then the community sees that happen and don't know what to do. So when you don't know what to do, you usually do one of two things. You either leave, go away. You might stand and watch for a while and stare and see what happens. Or if you get concerned enough that something bad may happen, you'll probably pick up the phone and call 911. There is another option, and that is to jump in and try to remedy the situation yourself with whatever tools and skills you have. And that all simply depends on who you are and your background and whether you recognize what you're seeing. And I mean, what would you do? How many times have you driven past the tent at the corner of State Route 104 and Highway 99 and gotten out and went to talk to the person inside the tent? Most of us have not done that. And there's good reason why most of us have not done that. You don't have the skills or the background. You don't know what it is you're walking into. So the police usually wind up on the front lines of this sort of thing because 911 gets called, usually out of compassion, sometimes out of fear of crime or witnessing a crime in progress. And then the police officer is just like you. They're just like you, except that they have some training and maybe some experience if they've been on for any length of time. So they apply their own set of skills and understanding their own level of compassion and empathy to that situation and try to make sense of it, try to remedy it. Hey, sir, you can't live here at the corner of 3rd and Bell. But what can I do for you? Hey, you can't stand in the middle of the street waving your arms, stopping traffic. So the police have varying levels of response and responsibility that they must perform at that point. But the reason they got there in the first place is typically because somebody called in. Sometimes we see it happen as well. Edmonds, I would say there wasn't a day go by when I was a patrol officer that I didn't have an encounter with multiple people who were addicted to drugs, experiencing the effects of narcotics or drugs of some kind, or some realm of mental instability. Now, when we talk about mental illness and drug addiction, those are often paired together, and I think that that's probably appropriate in many cases. But none of us today can accurately assess somebody in 30 seconds in terms of what their diagnosis would be medically, psychologically, spiritually, whatever it is. So the police are also in that same boat. We don't have the ability to do that. What we do have the ability to do is to stop crimes from happening as they are happening. At least so far we have the ability to do that. It's being eroded away a little bit in terms of our ability to engage people who are maybe in the mix of deciding to commit a crime, or maybe it's not important enough. I mean, we make those decisions every day in terms of whether we'll step in. Somebody will say to me when I see somebody walking against traffic, jaywalking or something like that, hey, officer, why don't you address that? Well, the answer has become more evident today. I'm not going to address that because the legislature doesn't seem to want me to do that. They want to wait until something more serious happens before I engage with somebody in an encounter that might possibly result in a use of force. Because ultimately, the responsibility of the police is to make arrests. It is to stop the bad thing from happening. It's to intercede on behalf of the powerless to stop the bad thing from happening. If there's any felony crime in progress, we call the police and we have an expectation. The police are going to come, they're going to bring their skills and tools, and they're going to do a stand-up professional job of rescuing the day. That's probably why most of us signed up to be police officers, that to help the community in that way. It's a scary job, but that's at the bottom line of it. If you peel back all of the different things that police officers are responsible to do, and you core it right down to the very basic and most essential thing, that's the thing that they need to do. At least that's what I told my patrol teams that their responsibility was. Everything else that the police do was an effort to build up our legitimacy, our professionalism, and the community's support of that job. I need to know that when things go bang, when I get there, the community's going to support the idea that I'm going to go there and try to stop the bad thing from happening any worse. I'm going to try to catch the people responsible for what happened. That's what the police need. So when it comes to homelessness, it's a different animal entirely. It's a different sort of thing. If I look at my time with the FBI and doing counterterrorism, I did that for 9 years. I was an Edmonds police officer assigned to the FBI. Most every person that I could call a terrorist that I investigated or pursued, not one of them was homeless. And most of them were not drug addicted either. There were some, but for the most part they weren't. Their support networks also were not anything of that. But the role of law enforcement and government to address that problem, think of our post 9/11 world, it was critical, super important to do. So, again, the ultimate role of the police has to be that at its core. Everything else we do needs to be in support of that mission. Now, turn the page to Arlington's program in Snohomish County. Fantastic. I love it. I think it's I've seen it happen. I watched Everett PD embark into this region for a while about 6-7 years ago. And I knew the supervisor who took over that unit when it was first started, and he had his doubts that it would even work. But gosh, the chief or somebody wants us to do this thing. Once they engaged with it, got some training, got a social worker on board or two, and partnered up with other community entities, then it became effective in some fashion. But that's true of every government program. I mean, you look at this this note here, the city of Edmonds has budgeted $550,000 for social services in 2021. Great. But if only it was $560,000, then we could really do something. It's just a number. And how do you measure the success? Mike, you measure success by saying you had 64% success rate in a certain time span. That's great, right? How do we know if what we're doing is successful? How do we know that the Snohomish County program or the Arlington program is going to be successful? Well, it's just a decision. And at some point, some people will say, well, if it helps one person, then it was worth it. But honestly, I'm not sure that's how government operates, right? In fact, I'm pretty sure it shouldn't, because there's no end to the dollar amount that is just right for us to infuse into a program that's run by the police or a section of government that'll make the problem go away. Crime itself is not going to go away. It won't. If only we had $6 million in the police budget, we could make crime go away. Sign me up. I'll pay. But we all know the reality. It's not going to go away. Maybe it'll have an impact. Maybe. Maybe. That's a lot of money for a maybe. So, from the police department's perspective, we're humans. I say we because it's only been a couple months since I've been retired, so I'm very gladly retired. But the police officers who work in this city are beautiful people. They're compassionate. They're extremely well trained. They're some of the most professional police officers you'll run across. And I've worked with many, and I've trained many around the state and around the Northwest. They're great people, and part of what makes them so great is their empathy. It was the chief characteristic that I would promote when I became a leader in policing. Empathy is not just an add-on. It is critical for our jobs as police officers. But that's because it makes the job more effective. It makes it better. Plus, it makes you a better human. Your interworkings with other officers is better. Your working with the community is better. The misrepresentation of ideas goes down. The communication all helps. So empathy was critical. But as a police leader, I needed to see that happen. So the bottom line is we need to have support from the community for the police to do what they do, but with the understanding that government can't solve homelessness no more than it can solve crime. So do we need to do something right now? Probably. I mean, the community seems to think so, right? And the community decides how government operates ultimately by voting. And so that's fine. That's good. If that's what the community wants, that's good. That's community standard. Is there a crisis right now? I think so. I think you're seeing a lot of concern on the faces that I'm looking at right now about what's happening outside of our area and what we're starting to see within the area that you live. That's fair. Can we solve it? Maybe, but not alone, not the government alone. These organizations that have been fighting addiction, character issues, personality problems, relationships, those sorts of things that if they go wrong, yes, they often result in crime. They bleed over into law enforcement realm. But where they start, and the solve for them is much more about these other human factors that other organizations with people who are much better trained and much better skilled and have the longevity to work with people, that's where I think the solution is. So if government has a piece in this, it's only as a partnership. It can't be alone.
So now we'd like to just open it up to questions from you guys with this expert panel. There's a microphone here. We can bring it to you if you need be, but I'm sure you guys have some burning questions.
We actually can't bring it to you. You have to walk to it because it's wired.
So, oh, thanks. Thanks for reminding me.
There you go.
There you go.
Be shy.
I won't be shy. This is just a problem that seems to be occurring a lot, and I don't necessarily think it's an Edmonds problem, maybe Linwood or other areas, but I read in Nextdoor today that a particular person that wrote said she's witnessed 4 or 5 people collecting large amounts of clothing and running out the door at Fred Meyer in Linwood. I personally witnessed someone getting tackled at Winco the other day that had a cart of groceries, and 2 Winco employees tackled this person, then called 911. So they're getting out the door at Fred Meyer, but not at Winco. Is it the store's policy, or what can we do as citizens of Edmonds and Linwood or whatever to try to turn that whole deal around?
I'll answer that. That's cool. So it's a great question and an acute observation. Nicely done. Winco, I think, started in Idaho, if I'm not mistaken. They're headquartered in Idaho. And they treat their loss prevention accordingly. So if you steal from Winco, the gloves are off. So, now I'm not making a statement that that's better, because other organizations, Fred Meyer included, have decided that employees. I'm sorry, I giggle because my wife was in retail for a number of years when she was first getting going as an adult, and as such, she had a store on Capitol Hill. Close time. I don't know if anyone went there, but anyway, when people would shoplift from close time, she would go chasing after them down the street, and anyway. I mean, don't mess with her, I guess, was what I learned. But if she caught them, which she didn't, the police interceded one time and told her, "What are you doing? What are you going to do if you catch it?" It's sort of like the dog that chases the car, What do you do when you catch it? And that's really been the point for many retail organizations to say that, look, if somebody goes out and shoplifts our goods and they run out of the store, if our employees go and chase them, they're doing work. Now, if they get injured while trying to tackle somebody who's responsible for that? And by the way, am I going to lose an employee for, 6 months of recovery for an injury? Was it worth the shoplift of a $40 item or whatever it was? Collectively, with the exception of Winco, the answer is no, it's not worth it. So the problem with that is it's sort of like announcing to the world that we no longer pursue criminals in cars. So, because now everyone goes and shoplifts, just like criminals now know that if you just keep driving away, the police will finally give up because we can't pursue them. Except if you're in Idaho, they can still pursue you in Idaho. So that's the difference. What you can do as a citizen, though, is still call it in, call 911. Is it a crime in progress? Yeah, it looks like a theft to me. I think that the store employee following them and not knowing what to do, maybe on the phone calling 911, hoping that somebody will respond. Thank you, Edmonds Police, for responding quickly to those sorts of things. Be very glad for where you live in terms of the police response. It's really top-notch. So you can be a good witness. That's what you can do.
Thank you. I was almost imagining when you said about Idaho that there was like potato guns involved, and like that would be a really good deterrent.
Look,
from
we weren't going to
stealing.
talk about college.
Okay. Looks like we got another question here.
Yeah. Hey, Alan, you brought up a point about when we as citizens, we see a situation like a homeless person, somebody living in a tent, and we hesitate to approach them because we don't really feel like we have the skills and we don't really know what to say. Is there any training or anything, any kind of program that would train civilians up to where we wouldn't feel so awkward in a situation like that?
So is there training available for to help citizens be able to address situations like that they see? Yeah, sign up for the police department. Become a police officer, get the training and do that. Or sign up and join one of these organizations and get the training that way. I don't know of any community efforts otherwise, and I honestly would be really hesitant to support one. Look, you can't be everything to everybody, and so you need to take care of you, right? And God bless us for having a heart of compassion and wanting to help people. That's really good. But knowing how to apply good resource to a situation is really key, right? I mean, as a police officer, that was super important too. When we learned about Cocoon House up in Everett, it was a great solution for a problem we were seeing with runaways who didn't want to go home, but they weren't committing crimes. So what do we do with them? What about if they turn 18? Now they're not a runaway anymore. Now, what do we do? So the Cocoon House has their thing. Mary's Place in Seattle is fantastic. Knowing about these organizations, whether they're publicly funded or not, that's for someone else to decide. But the fact that they exist and they have people who are trained and available, crisis lines, things like that, I think the answer for that really is knowledge is power, and knowing the right tool to use at the time is really half the battle. I don't recommend people going into totally unknown situations that are high risk. And I won't be bashful about saying that. The tent alongside the road is a high risk situation. It is.
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Can I ask? What, in your opinion, all four of you, are the top couple of things that Seattle has done wrong with this entire situation?
Okay.
I have no opinion.
You have no opinion?
I
I'll
guess
let you go first.
they're dealing with they're in the middle of a more complex situation than we have up here. And I think the idea of what we have up here is trying to keep a lid now. I'm shortening this down a little bit, but trying to get ahead of the problem, and because we're seeing it grow, right? So their problem has just grown in a crazy, unproportional way. And it's about management and resources, and that's kind of where we can see where that is so important. And if we don't have that up here, we're not going to be able to work with that system. So I don't know, I wouldn't say where they've gone wrong. It's just the resources that they don't have that we need to make sure we do have.
If I could speak to that too, it's just being involved in the system, so to speak, from what that looks like. I believe that, those crisis moments that, that Mike was talking about, when those changes occur, that punitive action is actually part of a crisis moment as an opportunity for me to make a change, a lifestyle change. So I think that the punitive actions that with the laws and so forth as they were, although I don't know much about what they are today from that perspective. I mean, from what I understand, that there's different laws and so forth now that deal with how much drug you have on your person, what they're gonna charge you for, or do some kind of legal or enforcement, whatever that looks like. But from my perspective, that punitive action says, aha, I did something wrong and I didn't realize it. Because as an addict, I began to get accustomed to my lifestyle at that time. And there were those crisis moments that came into play. So from that perspective of what we were talking about resources, I know that, I think, isn't it 211? Or is it 211? That is like a crisis line that has an opportunity at these different levels to find what those resources are. But ultimately, I think that the solution is going to be transforming a mindset, transforming the way I think and the way I feel and my choices, not just because I'm being institutionalized, but rather getting outside of that little Cartman triangle, that drama triangle, learning to become a coach instead of a rescuer, learning to become how do I speak to people like that, because now I want to coach them and realize that, wait a minute, you're not a victim. If I ask you the right questions, what do you think? How do you think you can come out of that victim mindset? Or instead of being a persecutor, you're doing the wrong thing, you shouldn't be doing this. What can I do to come in as a challenger instead of somebody who's crucifying them right there on the street? I challenge you to do these things and asking the right questions. I think probably to arm ourselves in these kinds of environments is to learn what those right questions are. I think that would be a huge impact.
Let me add on, because I think he's trying to be a little bit specific. And if anybody's watched the Seattle is Dying documentary, they do a deep dive into a lot of the issues and a lot of the tolerances that were allowed in Seattle. Full disclosure, I grew up in Seattle. I don't go back there anymore. It's very sad. But right now, I do believe there's a lot more tolerance as to, now it's statewide about usage, which we should talk about. I think there's a couple cities who, after that Supreme Court ruling, have actually passed ordinances in their own cities, and I think it would be worth asking if that's worthwhile from our police officers, if that would be helpful. But they don't enforce the no camping. We're not enforcing, or Seattle doesn't enforce the littering issues. And then they're just churning people back out. They're not really being pushed one way or the other. And maybe Mike can kind of speak to this. It's nice to talk like, hey, we want to love on them and bring, have that carrot, but sometimes there's got to be a little, I think, push from one end. What would you say, Mike?
Well, without getting... We have pamphlets in the back. If you run into some other crisis and you don't know how to deal with it, you can hand them one of our pamphlets, one of our cards, and tell them, when you're ready, call. And, I will either myself or volunteer or Jason or someone that we know, will go out and, meet with them and try and talk to them. I'm not exactly sure what you were asking exactly, but, yeah, I was down in Seattle.
He's asking what mistakes did Seattle make as a city that propagated their
Condos
issues.
are taking away low-income housing, transitional housing, and studio apartments. To increase the poverty level, people are living in $700 a month studios in low-income housing, and they bulldoze on them all and put these $1 million condos without taking into account how many people have been displaced. And displaced people in the streets suffering turned to addiction. It took an everyday working man that was trying to hold his family together, made him homeless, and he became a drunk and an addict. Why Seattle? I'm from Seattle. I grew up my whole life in those streets. point where you could get a $700 apartment is now $1 million Amazon studio. You know, why Seattle's dying is because you don't take into account the quality of place for everyone. And the quality of place for a few displaced all the people that were living right on the edge and continue to live.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason. Tamara, I think you had a question.
Might be tall for me. First, I just want to say thank you so much for your compassion here. And I'm hearing that level of compassion, and I was going to bring up the Seattle is Dying too. A big part of that documentary was the relationship between the cops and the addicts. And during the whole CHOP nightmare, there were a lot of debates with people saying, we can't send cops into these situations, we need to send in social workers. And my daughter is a firefighter, and she said, absolutely not. We need cops in first before anyone else can go in and have a safe situation. And I think that our community gets so lost in compassion and wanting to just fix and throw a voucher, and which I didn't know about that. Thank you for making me aware of that. So how do we get people educated, for one thing, to understand truly what is compassion, what is safe, and how do we vote for people that have real solutions? Because that seems like that's what our power is here, is knowledge and voting. So how do you help us with that?
I'm stepping out a little. I hate to use this word, but it's kind of more realism. I know it was a very, last couple of years have been just crazy with a multitude of things, but it did bring out to light a lot of things that society needs to work on, but we don't want to throw away what's working and replace it with something that's not quite assured yet. So I think that same philosophy is, yeah, I mean, we need law enforcement to go and deal with what's happening right now. Absolutely. In my situation, many times I've had a social worker stand right there with me or come up behind me, or my guys will call and say, hey, can you bring your social worker? Because we got the situation, it's calmed down now, but we want to talk. So there's ways of thinking and maybe thinking outside the box that we are being pushed towards, which is great, but we need to slow down and make sure we're managing that appropriately, not throwing away things that, and making it safe. I mean, we want to have society feel protected and also taken care of, and social workers are great, and I work with a bunch of them, and I've learned a lot through them, we'll just say, but at the same time, it's got to be supported on both sides, and frankly, if society wants more of that human services related program, it's going to take some money to do that, but don't take away from your public services as well.
Well, I'll speak a little to that. When you put social workers into the field, you're taking a person who, I guess historically, has worked in an office, and you're putting them into a different environment. That environment has different risks. And so in order to make that safe and effective, you have to train and equip those people to face the risks that they are going to encounter. At some point, you just can't be everything. So I love we've had numerous encounters in the field where crimes occur, we get to the situation, we bring order back from the chaos that happened, and then we try to leave with resolve. Sometimes that means taking somebody to jail, sometimes that means writing them a ticket or giving them a ride or giving them a bus. Sometimes it means trying to get them into some sort of service, whether that's a faith-based organization or something that the community has supported, whatever it is. But that was the gap, and you mentioned gaps, Janelle. That's where the gap happened, is that, hey, here's a bus pass. There's the bus right over there. Now, short of me dragging them and putting them on the bus, it's really up to them. It really is up to them. But if it's impacting the community so much, then at some point, that's a law, and you have to enforce the law. But bringing the social worker out into the field adds risk, and so that's why most of the firefighters and paramedics that I know, they were very adamantly against the idea of having social workers as part of the first responder team. Well, I mean, there was a time, it's still the case with fire and paramedics that, the police have to get there and secure the scene before the fire and paramedics can go in and do their job for the medical issues. And I see it pretty much the same way still. So with social workers, that's fine. But having them available then, on the spot, that's good. Getting the connections made then, whether it's a social worker, a faith-based worker, whatever it is. Bridging that gap, I think that's positive.
Thank you for bringing this incredible panel together. This is amazing. My father was a career police officer, and what drove him to retire was politics. So, the tip of the iceberg of the problem that Edmonds is having is the mayor. And the mayor is hell-bent on implementing King County policies. Are any of you able to influence the mayor with this problem? Because he is wanting to put together a task force to deal with this problem, and my concern is that he is not going to do what's best for our community. So, are any of you able to influence him?
Well, thank you for the question. That's my goal, is to be on city council and then influence how we move forward on these issues. And it's going to take legislation and a balance with the administrative leaders, and I think that's what it's going to take. I think an educated public on the issues. This is not the first time there's been a task force. I've been informed by Mr. Ken Reedy that, past city councils called for a task force on homelessness and addiction. I mean, it seems like we're kind of revisiting it. Funds were allocated and then actually moved for other issues. So that's something that's going to take us looking into and asking, okay, if this is something we've agreed to, you've asked your elected officials to set money aside, then why would you divert them into other things? So absolutely, I think we're going to try. I don't know. I mean, maybe, I think he did say for the task force he wants some nonprofits on there, and we can make a recommendation that he hires those. Linwood actually has more of a commission that is then based off of the city council's recommendations, like you would run a normal commission, versus a mayor's task force doesn't necessarily have the right process and proceed. Like it's not a real entity, I guess. It doesn't follow code. And I know that sounds like a lot of red tape, but really the proper way to address this is to have a commission out of the city council. Looks like Jason's got a comment.
Well, I would like to share, because Edmonds had an impact on my life, and there's a tool in Edmonds that I think wasn't touched on there, if I may.
Please do.
I'm going to turn that way. My name's Jason. I'm the vice president and founder of the Second Chance Foundation, and Edmonds changed my life. The Edmonds community and the tools that it already has in place today changed my life forever. I was one of the ones that prevalent out between 128th and 196 on 99, a little terrorist most of my life, getting hounded out of communities, getting swept up in sweeps, in and out of jails, from the time I was 12 till I was in my 30s. Somewhere before my 17th birthday, I just decided that's how life was going to be. And I needed to get hard, and I needed to get cold, and I needed to not care about the world around me. People ask why Why don't the homeless care about our businesses? Why don't they care about our community? Well, we don't really feel cared about. But an interesting thing happened to me, and it happened between Edmonds students at Edmonds Community College and my life. They decided to bring 20 college girls into an institution and into a chemical dependency program and tell us about the possibilities. I was like, yeah, that ain't happening. And they said, why is that? I said, I don't have anybody that loves me. They said, why do you think you need somebody to love you? They said, who's going to pay for it all? I don't even know how to write English. I don't know any punctuation. I don't know any grammar. It's not going to happen. They said, it's going to happen. I said, okay, whatever. I got to that point in my life that I was willing to surrender to anything other than going back out to the streets, going to detox one more time, going to another treatment program for 2 months and getting out homeless again. Hey, yeah, I'm sober. I get to deal with reality now. It's great. Wait till nightfall. It happened. I got out of an institution and I was introduced to a mentor, a student navigator who helped me with my financial aid. And I was like, okay, it's happening. But it wasn't happening. I remember sitting in my first math class and holding up my hand. I said, what language are you speaking? English. Oh, I'm in the wrong class. And I went back to my student navigator. But I stuck it out. And college changed my life. And every time I hear people being active in the community, especially Edmonds Community College, what about next steps? What about Edmonds life transitions and life skills class? What about my student club and my scholarship? Currently, I have 2,200 members statewide that are formerly homeless, formerly addicted, college students. They're all studying to be lawyers, public defenders, chemical dependency majors, human service majors. We're the next hire you're considering when you're considering treatment counselors, social workers. My friend works at the public defender's office. My friend Tara Simmons is a U.S. Senator, the first formerly incarcerated homeless U.S. Senator. My friends Chris Beasley and Christopher Paulo sit on the statewide reentry council. When you see about laws that are changing around addiction services and reentry services, they're the ones writing the laws. They're both master's levels lawyers in Seattle writing laws. So what I'm saying to the Edmonds community is when you think about where to spend money on motel vouchers, where you spend money on housing solutions, treatment is great, but what then? What do I do with my sobriety? What do? I have no life skills. I was a 12-year-old child when I hit the streets. I wasn't a drug addict. I wasn't I went to private Christian school. I sung in a choir on television. But a drunk driver mowed down my father and my adopted mother and changed my life. I didn't have any understanding of what streets and addiction and what happens after dark in a city. It took me 35 years to find my way into the college. Now I have 3 AAs and a BA in computers. I actually got offered to go work at Washington, D.C. with the Bureau of Justice and the cybersecurity team to tell them how they could do their job better. What I'm saying is that if we look at pathways to education and gaining a skill set and a work training that has an outcome that makes a homeless person an advocate for change and gives them the skill set to be tomorrow's treatment counselor. I spoke at Edmonds College one time to a drug treatment class, and I ended up being a leadership Snohomish County alumni. One time at Edmonds College, I just told my story. I found myself in a room of leaders, mayors, senators, city officials, and elected officials going, am I in the right place? Education gives us a stronger voice. Treatment's great, but we need a work pathway and an education pathway, and Edmonds College is hands down the best college in the state for helping somebody impacted by homelessness and addiction. Next Steps, Merritt Hicks, they take students into life skills, they take students into life transitions, and then they meet our student clubs. We have 28 members, formerly homeless, formerly addicted people taking human services and chemical dependency degrees, that we meet with them and say, hey, now become a student. So if you're thinking about passing out motel vouchers, you're thinking about passing out help, I would look at things like Gene Kim, who has 6 tiny homes next to Edmonds Community College that are for homeless students. I would look at giving them a skill set and some way to thrive so that that homeless person like me, that was 25 years an addict, 25 years a homeless, that becomes the next treatment counselor, the next student navigator. And Edmonds, taught me so much about my life. I had an Edmonds person that told me to do your art walk. I was selling little paintings for $20 on a street corner until I went into Edmonds Art Studio and found out that they charged $4,400 for them, which is how my foundation grew. I took that little art and started a foundation. We are active on 3 campuses, Edmonds, Skagit Valley, and now Everett College. We have student clubs there called Break-In Free Clubs, and I award out 32 scholarships every year to the tune of $250,000 with the people the courage to walk through the front doors of an education instead of getting a bus ticket out of your city. So I ask that if you're thinking about a solution, think about Edmonds Community College. Thank you.
Sorry. I feel so lucky to be here in this community. It's wonderful being here in Edmonds, and the resources that you've mentioned today are really great. But what about the people that are on the streets that don't want help? And I keep hearing that the people have gone out to try to get them off the streets. They don't want help because they can't do their drugs. Whatever. The second episode of that What's Wrong with Seattle mentioned involuntary treatment and incarceration, at least until they can get good help and use the resources that you're mentioning today. Do you see that as a possibility eventually?
I can kind of speak to that a little bit. If you're thinking about an involuntary system, it's very difficult, actually, with, we all have human rights and our basic rights. So unless someone isn't actually basically unable to care for themselves or danger to themselves, incapable in that way, that's when that kicks in. I'll start with law enforcement first. When we show up, we have the ability to send somebody involuntarily to a hospital, but then from there it's out of our hands. And then we hope that a doctor and then what we call I think they've changed the title again, but a DCR, who's a step above our social workers, who has the power to actually commit somebody for a longer term, will make that decision as well. And in between that, I'm going to get too much detail going, but in between that is the fact that they're likely on substances at that time, and when they come down, that's affecting, would they wait for them to come down if that's affecting their behavior? Sometimes they level out and they decide that they can go back on the streets. They can refuse the help and they can go out. I've now had DCRs explain to me a little bit better that they're a little bit like law enforcement, where if they're really going to need to commit somebody, they have to have a warrant to do that, and it has to go through a judge, so there's a process. They can do an emergency basis, but they still basically have to do an investigation, make a determination, and bring that to a judge, and then it's decided if they're going to detain somebody, and it will only be for a limited amount of time. And then either of those folks might have an opportunity to make a change then, or refuse and go back on the streets. So that system to just pick them up and put them someplace is we're not there yet. Is that kind of what you were going towards?
Well, yeah, I mean, what do you do with somebody that's on the street? It's not healthy for them. It's not healthy for the community. What do you do? There's got to be some way to get them into the resources that you're talking about here. These are great resources, but unless somebody wants to utilize them, what do? You can't let them just stay out on the street and endanger the community they're in.
I can probably give you a couple examples. Okay, I deal with this all the time. People in psychosis, you see them all the time. The meth addicted, the heroin addicted, fentanyl, whatever it is, flaying all over the place. We get a phone call. I actually had a young lady, I've had her into right here, Swedish Hospital, 15 times in the last 2 months. The last time I had her in there, the social worker said, "Don't bring her back. We're not going to help you." Right? This woman is paranoid schizophrenic, meth addicted. She has multiple personality disorder, so you don't know who you're talking to. I've personally met 4 of those personalities, and she knows how to manipulate and use the system. I've had her into Smoky Point Behavioral. I've had her at Oak Harbor Detox. I've had her at Swedish Hospital 15 times, and her parents more than that, and Everett, I mean, all over. The system is broken, if you ask. There is no fixing it at this point because of what I'm seeing and trying to help these people in those types of psychosis, you know, get help. And I've called a diversion center. I've called 211. You know, for example, Monday we called 211. They didn't get back to me until Wednesday. Oh, okay, let me go out and find that person. You know, the system's broken. You know, and that's why I'm here today. I'm not here for political matters. I'm not here for anything else. I wanted to be here to tell you what I see on the street that I see every day. And for your question, the system is broken, period. You know, you can take somebody to the hospital, but if they decide they don't want to stay, the police can't make them stay. I've been to court 3 times on this young woman, on Ricky's Law and a number of other laws that the state of Washington has put into place to help people that are a danger to themselves and others. And 3 times, 3 different judges, we've been denied. I've written letters, other nonprofit organizations have written letters, have tried to help this young woman. I see her walking down the street in high heels and her underwear in the rain, right down 99 and I actually took her to Edmonds. I picked her up in Everett, where she had walked that full distance, selling her body, is a danger to herself and others. So what do you do? What do we do, right? It really irritates me, you know, to have this type of situation happen. And it's not the first time. You know, during the middle of the pandemic, I was downtown Seattle at the base of the Space Needle picking up a young woman who had just turned 18 years old, who had been sex trafficked since she was 12 years old, right? They picked her up, the feds picked her up in San Diego in a car accident, put her into detox. Now this young woman had track marks all the way up and down her arms, up and down her legs where she had been, her sex traffickers had been shooting her up with drugs. Put her into detox in San Diego, treatment in California for 28 days, and then put her on a plane to Seattle where she's picked up immediately by a pimp, right? Back on the street. You know, I stay in contact with this young lady all the time because as long as she's got her breath in her body, you know, I want to try and help her. And it tears me up. But that's the reality of what's going on out there. And so you see these people, and you know, a lot of people aren't capable of walking up and talking to them. I have been around here for a while, so I have a lot of social media presence, Jason, and a lot of other foundations and nonprofits that call, and I talk to a lot of them. You know, like I said, we can't all help everybody, and I've come to that realization that as much as I want to try and save the world, I can't. You know, I can help one person at a time, and you know our laws need to be changed. You know, we're just way too out of control with this stuff. If I call a policeman, and you know, they can't even help anymore. You know, I was in Marysville. I picked a gentleman up. I've got the paperwork in my van where they caught the guy smoking meth on the sidewalk, right? They gave him a piece of paper, put his name on it, and strike 1, okay, can't arrest him. You know, he calls, he wants to go to detox, which I did get him there, and he kind of laughed about it, you know, because addicts can use on the streets now, and they all know it. They all know how to work the system. So the policeman let him go because I was on my way to pick him up to go to detox, but they wouldn't arrest him anyway. They just gave him it's like a paper ticket. It's not even a ticket. They get to do that 3 times before they give them an alternative. And I was recently on a panel at the legislators talking about the problems I was seeing, and it's, I don't even know where to go with it. I should probably shut up before I put my foot in my mouth, but that's what I'm seeing, and it is. It's absolutely sickening when I'm seeing these young people and their lives being destroyed. And I mean, I can't tell you, like 16 to 18 people in the last 6 months that I know personally that have been in my van that are dead today, right? Because of fentanyl overdose. And this goes back months, right? We're seeing it. We're not seeing those numbers, And I'm just appalled by the whole thing. I really am. I don't even know where to go with it anymore.
Oh, hold on. We've got one more question. We've really just got time for one more question. I'm sure as I don't even know if I'm on. Am I on, Keek? We can follow up after. But one more question, and we'll end it on you.
Thanks, Janelle, for putting this together. It's been really informative. And I agree. The system's been broken for a long time. All of Western medicine is broken in a big way. But, and it's very concerning. But this is a very simple, benign question. I just want to know if any of you know of any city, state situation where the hotel, motel vouchers have worked. Because I don't want to throw good money after bad. If that doesn't work, I think our community needs to know that it hasn't worked anywhere, so we can put our money towards programs that do work.
So I can speak a little to that, I guess. A little bit, yeah. So for Edmonds, about a year and a half ago, I was informed that we had some money for hotel vouchers for the police department to use. It came out of the CARES funds, and so we had some money to use. Supervisors were told, hey, if you run across somebody who needs housing, this is an option, and use your judgment. So historically, we've used hotel and motel vouchers for people who were victims of crimes, who were displaced because of the crime. So domestic violence situations, rape, situations like that, stalking, where somebody was at a continuing hazard without a safe house, some place to be. And so the idea, maybe even precedes that, but that's the idea that comes into it. The problem with vouchers for addicts is you're not addressing the issue really at all. Many people talk about addicts need to get to their bottom, reach bottom, get to their low point in life, and maybe that will help turn them around. I can tell you countless stories of people that I've had in the backseat of my patrol car that I've arrested who that was their moment. That was their big deal moment. I arrested them. Maybe I voiced compassion that night. Maybe I didn't. Either way, them going to jail was the thing that helped to turn them around. But we don't know what it's going to be. So having a voucher so that I can place somebody into housing for a night, it does accomplish some things. It prevents the next phone call from somebody traveling down the road and seeing somebody on the side of the road. So that's police services that get applied to that. So, it's not that it doesn't solve anything. It does solve some things. It can help. And occasionally you wind up with a situation where the reason, to Jason's point, the reason that they're homeless was from either gentrification or a crime happened and they were suddenly displaced and we didn't know that, and now they're in a tent because that's what they found on the side of the road to borrow for the night, and now you've encountered them. So you don't know where you're entering their moment, right? So I don't think it's a bad idea necessarily to have that power by government to say, hey, you're in crisis, we're going to step in and give you temporary housing because the community's decided that's a good thing to do. And it's fine, But as a program to address homelessness and drug addiction systematically, not even close. It won't touch it, the one-off, sure, I think that's a great idea. But systematically, I don't think you're doing much. I'd much rather support a business, maybe get out of their tax way so that they could put up some housing and then have a system in place that they themselves want to help the homeless, or that a faith-based organization wants to do that. And the community supports that on a more organic basis rather than saying that the government has to do it. I don't know.
I could add one more thing. I'm just thinking of the programs I work with directly, and it may be a conversation we even had. I think vouchers and hotels are going to work if they're managed by somebody, involve social workers in the community, and they're actively engaged in services. I mean, it can't be just an open door, emergency basis always, but I think it's got to be managed properly, and there's got to be a plan in place and an endpoint, and the ability to have some boundaries, and that takes a program to manage that, and a lot of thought, and a lot of commitment. We run the shelter program for the winter that I work with. We went, and because of COVID, we moved to the hotel program. That worked really well, but it is very well managed, sidetracking, sorry. Anyways, it was very well managed, and it's grown more because we've proven that we can make it a safe environment for everybody, and that's just a temporary situation for the winter. And these are families and other drug addicts that can be involved with this issue, but to get them in a safe place for the winter. But a long-term plan with hotels can work as long as it's managed well and it's got some backing.
Janelle?
Sounds good. Okay.
Can I speak just for a moment?
Sure.
So, in my experience, the comorbidity that happens with addiction and mental illness, you have those kinds of things that sometimes it's trying to treat the mental illness, where I'm self-treating the mental illness with the drug. And these programs that we're talking about here kind of put a stop to that, in the sense of give a timeout kind of a thing to allow to see where it comes from. Is it from the drug, or is it from the mental illness, or a combination of both? And they kind of exacerbate each other. But what I've found in just in my own recovery process is it comes down is my family of origin wasn't exactly the perfect spot. There's got to be a family. It's got to come. We all have to take responsibility for what we can do. It's not just let's pay these guys to go do something and pay these guys to do something else. But how can we bring them all together? And it comes. I believe it starts with the family. And the family side of it is how can I participate? Because every person that's out there has a family, unless they're the sole survivor somehow, but they typically have a family at some capacity. And so we need to understand is how can we come together as a family and start to support, and some of those families of the addicted through that, which is one of the things that happens at New Heart Ministry on Monday night. There's a process where you're with other like-minded people and you're working through some of those things to be able to go to your family member from that perspective. So it's not a simple fix. There's no doubt about it. But if you have a program here and a program here and a program here, it's a matter of bringing it together. So when you have a housing voucher or something like that, what's coming up on the other side of that? Is there? How do we get them into a family kind of, a new family kind of environment if their family of origin isn't working? What do they need? I hear the word support. I hear the word love. I hear all these other kinds of impact that goes on. So it's not just, let's stop you from using, because then after you're done using, now you're dealing with whatever other issue. Let's give you the house you need. Well, wait a minute. The reason I don't have the house is because of these other issues back here. So it's a matter of getting the other services. It's not just service, but rather, I believe it has to do with relationship. It's got to be a relational, solution. Is what that comes down to. Throwing money at it isn't going to fix the problem.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists here today for sharing their stories. Giving us incredible insight. I'm really hoping to use a lot of this information going forward. And obviously, I think I've even got a lot more homework to do. I think we as citizens have a lot more homework to do. We as citizens have a lot more outreach to do to our other elected officials. Perhaps it sounds like our judges at this point need to be heard from by us constituents. This is a really tough topic, obviously. I mean, there's so many more souls here that I wasn't really knowing that we were going to unpack. I thought I thought we'd get deep, but I didn't know as deep as we got. And I really want to give an extra thank to our plus one panelist here, Jason. Yeah, and I'm going to turn it over really quick to my campaign manager, Eric, and then we'll wrap things up.
So, a couple quick things. First of all, thank you all for coming. Let's thank Keegan, Janelle's son, for doing a great job with sound.